Welcome, everyone. You are listening and watching simultaneously Rashkin Report and Silicon Curtain, with which I congratulate you and thank you. Please hit like, subscribe. That's what polite people do in respectable company, which we do try to be. I am excited to welcome, as every week we get together with Jonathan Fink of Silicon Curtain and we compare notes because Silicon Curtain, Jonathan, first of all, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here and in very refined company. I've never asked you whether you put the milk into the bone china cup first, but I presumed that is the case.
Well, I can tell, see, because my coffee's in a Bandera cup.
That shows
That's how you know you're in a fine
exquisite,
company. Okay.
exquisite taste. Yeah.
Well, here we are, and it's winter 2026, and it seems like we have demented and dangerous president, and then we also have this world that seems to be on fire, but also on ice at the same time, because we have storms that are taking over southern states. We have Greenland or Iceland or some piece of ice or other. And then we have, of course, ice in Minneapolis. And that's a big story. And for me, because I mean, I live next door in Wisconsin. So for me, this is like neighboring, in our neighborhood situation. But in the meantime, there's people freezing, very cold in Ukraine, in Kiev in particular. And
Yes.
so that's that's the kind of winter, I guess, of 26 that we're starting here.
Ice and fire. I mean, it could be like a Game of Thrones script, except that I'm afraid the reality we're living through makes Game of Thrones seem kind of slightly tame.
It's interesting because when you mention a TV show, we are starting to realize more and more to what extent our president functions like a TV character. And then he has a bunch of people around him where we're like, oh, we didn't think that this person was going to be gone during the first season. But there's the, Bovino character who was like the little Hitler or whatever on the streets of Minneapolis, a little short dude who was like attacking the crowd with smoke grenades, flash grenades, rather than talk to people. And they got him out of there. And we're like, whoa, that character was gone, that villain, because it's just like it's a cinematic universe of Trump.
That's it. I mean, I think the pattern, of course, is that anyone starts to gain their own independent fame, starts to challenge him. So on the one hand, it's like, get that guy out of the way because, he's damaging the brand. And let's face it, this isn't about legalities. This isn't about morality. This is like, yep, the brand has taken a hit this week. So we need to do a little bit of rebranding. That guy's gone. But there might be another reason there, which is he's developing his own, platform. He's developing, he's recognized, he's on TV, people know his name. Yeah, Trump doesn't like that. Trump really doesn't like that. You want people like Rubio, Hegseth, Miller, who've had, let's say, humanity bypasses or personality bypasses. With him, he's okay to keep them around as backdrop.
He seems to have people around him that without him would be either nothing or in jail. So that means that he's got a lot of loyalty there, the same way that he has loyalty to the White House, because if he's not in White House, he's either in Russia or he's in jail. And so I think that the stark choices faced by this administration leads them to polarize the country, because what's going on, and I saw an interesting post comparing a murder of Alex Pretty and Renee Good in Minneapolis to execution of John Brown, which ultimately led to civil war in the United States, and partially because of how differently people in the United States at the time looked at John Brown, where to the south he was a criminal and to the north he was a hero. And now we're starting to see similar legend forming narrative forming around these two people that to some are martyrs and to some are borderline internal domestic terrorists. So we're seeing a really interesting, fascinating like split of society that starts from our information silos and where we get our information, and who knows where it's going to lead us.
Well, I'm going to be maybe a little more, a little radical here, and that is what we think we're seeing here is not just the tactics of authoritarian regimes, whether it be South or Central America or Russia, or whatever. We're seeing that kind of playbook being imported At the same time, it's running in parallel to the kind of playbook that the US used to run in, say, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and dare I say it, the British ran a few of those as well, which is where governments come in, they're centre-left, they're this, they're that, they're trying to nationalize the oil companies or whatever. We don't like it, so we're going to have a coup d'etat, and we're going to use various machinery to do that, and we're going to use various narratives to demonize them. It seems to have got those two things working in conjunction. The regime acting like an actual regime, and at the same time, it's got the instrument of being able to depose regimes at the same time. And Trump made this extraordinary. Apparently, there was an extraordinary conversation with Tim Walz, I think, the governor of Minnesota, if I'm not wrong there. And at one point, something that actually horrified the governor is that they were having this beautiful conversation, absolutely perfect conversation, as Trump would call it. And at some point, apparently, Trump said, "Well, do you know what? We had great success here, and we had great success there. I don't understand why we're getting resistance and not being successful in Minneapolis. We had great success in Venezuela." And suddenly, the governor sits back and thinks, like, "Hang a second, he's comparing this situation to Venezuela." That isn't just dementia and cognitive decline, which is an issue. That unfortunately seems to me that everything exists in a kind of one-dimensional space. He doesn't understand borders, doesn't understand sovereignty, doesn't understand legality. Everything kind of collapses down into a kind of like they have in black holes. It all collapses down into an event horizon of his own narcissism, and that's how everything gets interpreted.
But I think it's important to remember that this is not a surprise. He announced this when he spoke to those 800 generals, and he said that we're going to test this in this American cities, and people went, "What? What are you talking? What?" But now we see, I saw in New York Times this morning a picture of this, a bunch of people in military uniform seemingly storming a house ready to storm a house in Minneapolis. Lady opens the door, African-American lady who looks like she's wearing a nurse's garb, and that's her, and they're looking to break in, and there's a camera, we see like a point explaining which kind of a gun this is and this kind of a gun, and this is presented to us by our military reporters. So on one hand, we see that reporters and journalists got kicked out of Pentagon, but on the other hand, we see that the whole country may be turned into a war zone for them to report from. Isn't that great? So I think that Trump he said what he's going to do, and he's doing it. That's part one. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that I think you over there across the pond don't understand what it's like not to have a clue. We don't have a clue about this. We don't. This is why we so desperately compare things to Nazi Germany, because that's our only point of reference. And this is like Gestapo, right? This is like all of this. And then we go, well, no.
We have lots of examples there, don't we? In Europe, we have Romania. You have all the puppet states that Russia ran, etc., etc. The stars.
Right. But we in America, the only thing we can connect to is no kings. Like, that's the only thing we understand, because the one story we all agreed on is that we separated from England because they had kings. We don't have kings. And then some stuff happened. And and there's been dark chapters in American history. Who knows what could this could be? But the idea of an authoritarian state, like, or overthrow of government like we've done in other countries, or all of this happened elsewhere. We over here, it's only the immigrants that know what's going on.
Yeah. And the idea, the image of having, Humvees and armored vehicles on the streets, that is a certain level of kind of normalization of violence, which, tradition has been the projection of imperial power, American power in other countries. And, whatever narrative you put in it, whether it's, the imposition of some sort of, governance or order or a coup, whatever it is, we're used to seeing that sort of militarization of people's domestic space in their countries. Now it's coming home. But we did have a taster of this, I think, in the first administration, where Trump didn't tackle as such, but many in his regime weren't quite the sycophants he's got now, and they pushed back and said, "Well, hang on a second, you're going to send Black Hawks or whatever into Washington and buzz the..." You can't do that. You got to invade your own cities, and there was a certain level of pushback. What I think is fascinating about this now, I want to get your point of view on it. because this does give me some hope. You started the episode with the idea that there may be some hope. It seems that Trump is absolutely allergic to negative headlines, whereas your classic dictator will just charge through that. They'll just steamroller through that and they'll stick to what they're doing. Here we see a degree of, I would say, internal panic, not an admission of culpability. It's not a reverse of policy, no matter what the legacy media says about it, but it is a certain squeamishness at the headlines they're generating through their actions, which they fully intended to do. They wanted to cause mayhem. They wanted to cause death. They wanted these headlines. But there's a certain squeamishness at the result of their own work. And then they turn on each other. Noam turning on Miller, Miller turning on Bovino. They're all, and Trump potentially going to chuck a few of his goons, out of the balloon, as it were, to get rid of some ballast and lift it back up. If this was a fully if they were competent authoritarians, I'm trying to say, they would just motor through this, as we see Peskov and others do. They lie and they lie and they lie gratuitously and they never apologize. And actually, they double down on the lies when they're called out for the lies. It seems here that Trump is tackling his own revolution.
Look, Jonathan, I think that there's no question or no argument that they are cowards, that they're morons, and that they're liars. But that's not what gives me hope. What gives me hope is the fact that Minnesotans came out in freaking cold weather. The whole country is outraged over murder of these people and basically execution style. And the more we see it, the more we realize how unfair this is. And we start to think about, oh my God, if these people that killed Alex Preddy, basically when they found a gun on him, that was his death sentence. And these are our border guards. So this is like what's happening. We don't know what's happening on the border where these people operate usually, where there's no cameras. Oh my goodness. And so what happened, and in part, this is because of the United States and our particular history, where we have a certain totem pole of different people and where they are in a society. And if something happens to an illegal immigrant, somebody who doesn't have their paperwork in order, basically a human being without a proper paperwork, if something happens to them, it's not the same as if something happens to a citizen, or if that citizen happens to be of a different skin color or gender. And what we saw, it's not that we're all racist or not. It's that we saw that when this system can't ultimately respect a 37-year-old white man in Minneapolis and wipes him off like he is nothing, nobody has a chance. And that freaked people out, kind of like what happened with George Floyd, I think freaked out Black people because they felt like there is no bottom. And I think that's what gives me hope, is that all of these substitutions, all of these, oh, we're going to move this guy over here, oh, we're going to talk about whatever, we're going to lie, we're going to be morons, we're going to be cowards, all of that stuff, it's not helping them because people are still afraid. And as long as people are going to be afraid, they're going to demand action, and they're not going to be satisfied with these movements of puppets around, movement of chairs on a Titanic. It doesn't matter because we don't feel safe. And until we feel safety connected to our government, until we can, frankly, not even safety, until we can trust our government, this wave, I don't believe is going to stop. It's going to reflect in elections. It's going to reflect in lawsuits. It's going to reflect in protests. But people are not doing this because we just want to do one more thing and then we can go home and rest. We're doing this until this nutsiness stops. And I think that's where Minnesotans are so amazing because, man, I live in Wisconsin. There was a protest outside. I was teaching a class. I could not go, but my head is off to people who are south of Minnesota, 5 hours by car, who go outside. 150 people in Janesville came out. Lots of people came out of Milwaukee. It's freaking cold. And look at the videos of what people are doing because they want to send a message. They've had enough. That's what gives me hope.
And it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, there's the absolute impunity is one of those things. This projection of the idea that it can happen to everyone, but we're seeing it implemented in such an indiscriminate way. and they're not waiting for one group to be coerced before they started another. So actually the strategy, which has been quite successful, say in Germany in the 1930s, you destroy the power of one group before you start on the other, and you take a little bit of time over it, and you have a bit of mythology, a little bit of methodology around your terror. Now, obviously, I'm not justifying this in any way, but it is a kind of strategy. What we see here are these clowns have kind of half learned the strategy, and they're implementing it in a half-baked kind of way, and doing it all on steroids because they're in a real rush. So they're not waiting for one group to be cowed and coerced and finished off before they start the other, which destroys the effect. It's because you start on a new group before the other one's finished off. Well, they can ally with that one, and then you start another group. Well, they can ally with that one. Now they've got Second Amendment people, the NRA, right-wing podcasters, as well as everybody else and different ethnicities, all saying, "Hang on a second, we're all in the frame here, all of us, irrespective of who we thought were going to be punished by this regime, those who fulfill our various prejudices." No, they're realizing almost simultaneously it is everyone who is in the crosshairs. It's just strategically done. Now, maybe, I'd love to hear your view on this, it may be the strategy here was to militarize the streets in blue states, coerce and scare and terrify voters, create the scenario where you could declare those results invalid, and people are so terrified and coerced they don't actually, protest it. But what they seem to be doing, because they're just so incompetent, is they're actually alienating red states, which they hadn't planned on invading. And now they're going to potentially lose some of those red states. So what are they going to do? Are they going to send ICE into GOP states as this whole strategy starts to unravel?
That's some drastic thinking there, Jonathan. Whoa, because I think this is all kind of built on being cruel to others. And so people are asking me, and I think everybody's asking everybody, each other, why Minneapolis? Why Minnesota? Like, what the hell is up with them? And I think that there's multitude of reasons which all point to Minnesota, but also give us some ideas of what's going to be happening next. And on one side, we see that if you have a state that voted for against Trump, because it's not for it's against Trump, and if your city is against Trump, and if you're in a red area like Minnesota is, because it's kind of like the last island, electorally speaking, in Midwest, where that did not go for Trump. Our Wisconsin, to my shame, you have to admit, we voted, still one of those swing states that went for Trump. So that's not the target. Target is Minnesota, which consistently went against Trump. Politically, they're small, they're an island, and they thought that they could show that the cruelty sells, that they can show that they're not effective, that they're cruel, and that their popularity will increase, at least with red states, at least with their own base. But the problem is, and I think that's also the big, another tragedy of Alex Pretty is murder, is that he had a gun, and the reaction of this administration that is so anti-gun, so anti-people's rights to carry weapons, that it's to Democrats, people who have memory, remember also Wisconsin, Kyle Rittenhouse, who came out during protests in 2020 with an AR-15 and killed at least one person. I don't remember the details, but he was, deemed to be okay. He was found not. He basically is going on with his life, while Alex Pretty is dead. And Alex Pretty was wrong, and Kyle Rittenhouse is right. And I think that is bothering a lot of Second Amendment advocates who are trying to see the hypocrisy in those kinds of statements, where Trump says, well, he shouldn't have been there with a gun. It's true. People shouldn't be at a protest with a gun. It's dangerous. But it seems to be more dangerous if you're against Trump. And that's really, I think, one of those horrible ironies, that this gun that is supposed to have been his protection was what led to his execution, practically. Because first they removed the gun, then they yelled he had a gun, and then they shot him. and that's, I think, is a very powerful message to a lot of people who are who carry guns with them everywhere they go, and sometimes more than one. Not to mention that in Minnesota itself last year, I heard number 400,000 hunting permits that were issued. I mean, there's a lot of people with, it's just, this is our culture. And so to tell us that apparently it's the wrong thing to do, this is not the person from whom I expect sensible advice. And so when this comes from Trump, this is, so I think to me, that's why Minnesota, and that's why he's having some of the kickback in red states and all over the place, because this is not that policy that people who voted for Trump, who voted for him to hurt other people that they don't like. But this guy, he was a nurse. He was a ICU, intensive care rehabilitation, intensive care unit nurse.
Worked with veterans.
Yeah. I know. There's video of him. And now we have a commenter in our comments saying here in chat saying that in America, there's a lot of AI videos being pushed out there that showed Alex Spretzes being violent. And so people are like, well, now we have to deal with this. Okay, look at this. Yuri, it's pushing non-gun owners to go shopping. I don't know what's pushing to what, where, but I think, well, again, sorry, Yuri, I don't agree about arms bearing. You can, but it seems to be common sense that bringing a gun to a protest with this kind of a level of enforcement seems to be dangerous, apparently. So that was the consensus from people who do law enforcement. But then at the same time, he had a right. He had constitutional right. And his first, second, fourth, I think like 10th, 14th amendments were ignored. And that really worries a lot of people in blue and red states. This is where we need to come together for our Constitution.
And I think that, that video, whether it's AI or real, of him apparently attacking a nice vehicle and looking, extraordinarily angry, if that's real, actually, it bears no relation to how he was executed. It bears no relation at all, because I doubt very much that anybody in that scrum, that rabble that piled onto him, would have had any awareness of any, previous confrontations. The two things are entirely, I would say, unlinked in this case, and certainly no justification whatsoever. But this is clear. I mean, this seems to be quite an interesting question, in fact, because the Second Amendment, and I'm not pushing any gun thing. I'm coming from the UK. I get extraordinarily nervous around anyone carrying guns, including police officers, or at the airport where they have the big submachine guns. It's like it's terrifying, and it strikes me as sort of unnecessary for people to be armed. And I prefer any environment I'm in to not be that. That's not to say, I haven't gone to rifle ranges and gun clubs and handle guns. I've actually done that, and I in a certain context, I think it can be quite enjoyable pastime. It is kind of fun. But this seems interesting. Their argument was always, well, we have to have guns to prevent authoritarianism rising. Trump comes along, and it's like they don't make the connection. Fine, but suddenly the penny seems to have dropped, which is that this regime is terrified that the populace has guns and might be able to protect themselves. So in some ways, they were right. An authoritarian regime comes along, and they're not going to want people to have guns and defend themselves against an authoritarian slide. It just so happens it's a Republican regime or a MAGA regime that is going to potentially take their guns away or shoot them for having a gun. I mean, it's extraordinary absurdity, the kind of absurdity only Trump could have perhaps engineered.
Again, I'm not going to deny the hypocrisy of right-wingers in America from the moment. I mean, I was just hoping that their hypocrisy is going to be stopped at their constant wailing about national debt, that they do nothing but pile on as soon as they get into power. So that was kind of like, I was hoping their hypocrisy is going to stop there. but now we see their hypocrisy continues on to the Second Amendment and right to bear arms, and people's right to exercise their rights. That's how democracy and rule of law works. That whether you like it or not, you deal with it because it's the law. Like all of a sudden, with this administration, we have no constitution. This is really unnerving. Now, there's a comment here from somebody. Look at this. Protecting illegal immigrants won't benefit you. You'd be better off focusing on economic policy. Now, I'd like to answer to this moron and explain that economic policy is immigration. And so this is precisely part of the, like a huge part of the problem, that I have a co-host every Sunday morning, Mikhail Tripoisky, that we do a stream together in Russian. And he is like the liberal Russian voice of New York. That's, and he constantly talks about this madness. We need immigrants for our economy. We have jobs that are going to be done only by immigrants that Americans don't want to do. And so our economic policy is very much our immigration policy and vice versa. So if you're going to be talking about economy and ignoring immigrants, well, hopefully you understand, you're missing like your solution, your tool. Of course, I was involved in a discussion on my county board where we had a presentation about changing demographics of Wisconsin and how we're lacking jobs. We need more people to do jobs, where they could come from. And one of our conservative members, who since lost election because people didn't care for that kind of rhetoric, said, what if we just forbid all abortions? Do you think that would solve our employment problems? And the person was like, no, it's not. And I said, is it possibly that we need immigrants? And he said, well, we really can't talk about that as part of it, but yes. So, come on. For those that are thinking that this is not connected, this is not just about being cruel or being nice to marginalized groups. There's some freaking common sense here, because if Trump is supporting it, there is no common sense there. So just go the other way. And ultimately, I think the solution there is turning this off. Not this podcast. This podcast, save it, share it with people, hit like and subscribe. But with Trump, people got to quit on that stuff, because that's just no good. It's like crack. And I think that's what needs to. That's when he's going to turn out, because he's the TV character. Turn TV off. The only question that his cabinet members need to be asked is, when are you resigning? Are you resigning yet? Have you resigned yet? And then leave, because these people, they need to be treated as illegitimate through their policies, because otherwise that's part of the resistance that needs to occur, besides the courts, besides the protests, besides the elections, is they need to be delegitimized in that field. Now we can say, well, that will create just another silos. But you know what? In the situation that we live in, they're going to try to break into our silos and pollute them anyway. So I'm trying to, at least like on Rashkin Report, it's a small little silo where I try to present information, and there's no Trump supporters there and there's no Putin supporters there. Sorry if it's a biased conversation.
And there are nuanced conversations to be had, which I think some of a conservative mindset who are a little more reasonable will point out, that there needs to be conversations about integration, not necessarily allowing people to have education based on religious background alone. There are certain nuanced conversations that could and should be had, and of course the quality of education. Because if you want immigrants to become productive, you want their next generation from going from the jobs that no one wants to do to becoming middle-class professionals, which ideally is the ideal there, you have to give incentives for upward mobility. You have to invest in the education and the integration that allows you to have a population that, dare I say it, bring new values into society, but also are aware of and share some of the values that your society has. That includes democracy. Now, that's not just confined to immigrants. It seems to me that one of the problems we've got, and this is unfortunately the same here as it is in the US, is that the basic understanding of how the mechanisms of democracy work, how constitutionality, rule of law work, the very awareness of that amongst both immigrants and native population is lamentably poor, dangerously so.
Here's a really weird conundrum that I find myself in with immigrants, because as an immigrant myself, As an American naturalized citizen, as a local elected official, I see huge benefits to immigration. This is the workforce we need for the future. Our birth rate is not holding up. We need people in this country. And these are people who want to be here. And instead of welcoming them and giving them the necessary paperwork so we could track them in case they commit any crimes, so we could easily identify them and solve the issue, we instead just fight the concept of these immigrants and at the same time talk about education. Well, what happens is, and what happened in 2024 is a lot of these immigrant communities, including Russian community, voted for Trump because the education level often, although Russian community is a different problem, they just been different conversation, but overwhelmingly, especially Latino immigrants, we see people who don't have the highest level of education, but have a high level of saturation of religion, and so conservative set of beliefs, who looked at Trump, who looked at Kamala Harris, and decided to support Trump. Now, granted, today, many of them have decided that this was a bad idea. But we can't squarely count on the demographics here and say, you know what, as long as we get enough people of color into this country, we're going to be okay to withstand authoritarians from within the country who are, I don't know, too lazy to get up of their butt and get an education, get a decent job. But we see a lot of things changing at the same time. We see AI that is affecting everything. And we see the middle class that is becoming less out of reach, more out of reach for people, moving out of reach for more and more people. And so dynamics are shifting. And so you see that some people have money, a lot of people don't have money, and it's like doesn't even change, doesn't even affect depend on the color of their skin. Sometimes we see plenty of super wealthy Indian people from India, from any country you can think of. There's wealthy people there, and there's enough of them to come to America and to kind of move our economy forward. But we're just not. This is not working for us. And immigration, yes, we need to have solid borders. We need to have basically, I would think that all the technology that ICE now has access to, they could have used that technology to make a high-tech border and to track everybody who goes in and out, if nothing else. That's just my speculation. But I mean, I feel like rather than saying, forget immigrants, immigrants are bad, we need to track immigrants. But then when they get here, that doesn't mean automatically they're going to vote for Democrats. In fact, well, as Russian community shows, they're just as likely to overwhelmingly vote for somebody who is against immigrants. And then you go, why were we fighting for you? And I feel almost guilty for people who, my relatives here who live in America who are out demonstrating in 80s and, for right of Soviet Jews to leave. And then they leave, and these are radicalized people who vote for Trump. I'm like, I'm sorry.
This is it. I always wondered at the conservative tendency of those fleeing, especially communism. Maybe it's a reaction the other way. Maybe it's, grasping after what is perceived to be a sort of stability in values that they don't see in the sort of the left or so on. You saw it in quite a few of the I would say defectors as well. Many of the defectors, especially the KGB ones, had some fairly sort of right-wing and in some senses, they were vehemently pro-democracy while expressing certain ideas that didn't seem to me to necessarily chime with democracy. Even Bismilov, whose thoughts on Russian active measures and psychological techniques, I think, are extraordinarily interesting. There's a pattern here of, I would say, extreme right politics. You see it, of course, in Israel as well. Many of the Russian emigres in Israel are on the right and sometimes the extreme right of politics there as well. So no, they don't necessarily. And they might be fleeing something, and they may see that democracy has the mechanisms to provide them with a better life and fulfill their potential. That doesn't automatically make them democratic in spirit or culture.
Not at all. But you know what? At this point, I would like to very proudly say, maybe you heard as well, but for those that haven't, Alex Vindman, who the central character in the first impeachment of Donald Trump, the man who said, no, that's not okay. When Trump told Zelensky, we just want you to do us a favor for that javelin that you're supposed to get already, javelins. Now we want you to find dirt on Biden. That's when Alex Vindman said no and created a situation that led to first impeachment. Now, his twin brother, Evgeny Vindman, is actually serving in Congress. And now Alex Vindman announced that he's running for Senate in Florida. Wow. So, this seems, I don't know if this is going to be a chaotic campaign or if this is going to be a campaign of domination, because on one hand, it's Florida. On the other hand, you have a senator that is there on the Republican side because Alex Vindman is running as a Democrat. But on the other side, we have some lady who was appointed there when Marco Rubio got yanked. And I guess Laura Trump or whoever else Trump didn't get it. So they found this Ashley Moody, I don't know, somebody. And so that's going to help because that's not like a solid incumbent. And there's going to be tremendous outrage against Trump all over the place. But it's still going to be an uphill campaign. And I think the candidate Vindman is going to need all the help that he can muster.
And these guys, especially, the loathing of not just the Trump regime, but the loathing of actually anyone on the GOP side for them is extraordinary. When in fact what they've done in speaking out and aligning themselves with the absolute letter as well as the spirit of the law is in some ways heroic, but that they have absolutely vilified by those on the right. I think, we need more of those people. So turning back to this idea of whether there's some kind of hope, you see hope in the resistance that people are showing, the organized resistance and passion that people are showing. Is there hope to be had in another two arenas? One is the start of legal barriers being put in place and legal accountability for the lawlessness. And the other one, which you mentioned earlier, is that it seems that despite cosplaying a fascist takeover, that actually Trump and his clowns did not have the stomach or the brains to actually pull this thing off.
I think they don't feel like they have the support to pull it off. They're perfectly willing to go as far as the system will let them, and this is where we are now watching perhaps Death Watch career, of Stephen Miller, because there's a person who has just been behind all of this cruelty against immigrants from the very beginning. Has been identified as such. Has been identified by AI as likely author of Trump's speeches on the topic. And he is basically telling Secretary of Interior Kristi Noem what to do, according to her. And so now that Republicans are certifiably, verifiably upset about what happened and what's happening in Minnesota, there is a possibility that there will be just enough pressure to perhaps something. We'll know that the administration truly feels under pressure if we see that Stephen Miller leaves. But that would be hard to imagine, because similarly to Putin, Trump doesn't get rid of people when they get into trouble, because that would be showing weakness. So it's important to hang on to your losers through the hardship, and then when they're perfectly done, maybe get rid of them if necessary. But the legal resistance, I think, is playing a huge part in what we're seeing. The key is you got to live to get to court. And you got to be able to to do those things, because when we have a federal judge in Minnesota saying that ICE has at this point violated something like 100 court orders, we see that there's a lot of court orders that they're violating, that there will be consequences, but how and when we don't exactly know, because on some level it feels like we have a term limited king. And Americans, we don't like it, don't accept it. But Trump is acting with this impunity and immunity from Supreme Court, that he feels he can do anything he wants. And even when he can't, he's being told that he is doing whatever he wants still. To me, like what happened with Greenland, when Mark Rutte came out and was like, sure, we made a deal, and walked into a room with Trump, told him whatever Trump wanted to hear. And now Trump feels like he's got enough. He still lives in a bubble. He still lives surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear. And that leads us to the problems that we're having, because we see courts that are not happy with this. We see people who are not happy, politicians who see lots of opportunity. Big question that I'm being asked by my Ukrainian listeners, and I probably yours as well, is do you expect there to be an election in United States in 2026?
This is it. They'll know how the Yanukovych playbook goes. And Timothy Schneider has said that, you guys have your own Yanukovych to deal with now.
Indeed, and he came to us courtesy of the same Manafort. So I think that there's some interesting crossovers. But we'll see. I think right now it seems to me that the political spectrum is occupied with two ideas at the same time, which we must be able to do. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And that means we have to understand and accept and deal and fight for the elections in general. And the fact that FBI just raided election offices in Georgia speaks to what extent and how serious they're looking at arguing about the legality and legibility and legitimacy of any elections. And at the same time present candidates that are appealing to people because there's still an election process that's unwinding. We can't just say, okay, there'll be no elections, Trump is going to fight it, there's no point in running. No, it's an important part of trying to preserve some kind of normalcy is to have candidates. And that's where I'm really looking forward to seeing some Republicans run for president, because that's what it's going to tell me that Trump doesn't act like a lame duck, that he is a lame duck. And even if that announcement comes from J.D. Vance, who is currently the anointed future leader of MAGA, which could change tomorrow, tonight, whatever. This is why we live stream these things. But that's, I think that this administration is just going to keep pushing as far and as fast as they can because they know they may be limited by elections.
Even Mike Pence, let's face it, would be something, somebody who's going to stand up with even
absolutely. There's a few candidates,
although
Steve Bannon is not the one that I would cast my lot with, but there's, I'm trying to think. I was really encouraged. There's actually a candidate for governor in Minnesota, Republican, who dropped out. Why did he drop out? Because he said, I can't support this Republican brand of what's happening right now in Minnesota. I can't run. There's no way for a Republican to win a statewide election right now in Minnesota, is what he said, and dropped out. I'm like, wow, that just warms my heart, But there will be
who do they field instead? A sort of Timu version of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, of course, interestingly has now flipped, but
right, and exactly. Cheryl is absolutely right. When after Alex Preddy was murdered, the Attorney General Bondi sent a letter to Governor Walz saying that we will leave if you give us Minnesota voter rolls. What?
That's just nuts, isn't it? But there's a plan here, because if we take the legacy media point of view, it's you take what Trump says one day as being truth, and then when he comes up with the post-truth flip, because nothing he says is real, it's all contingent on how he's feeling, the state of his brain, how many cheeseburgers he had, and what is going on in the world. Nothing is set in stone at all, but the legacy media then do the follow-up. If we say, look, if we're trying to see a pattern here and not just Trumpian chaos, then he has a couple of choices. One is to say we went too far and start to retreat. That is not what any authoritarians anywhere do, because that signals they're finished. He could say, okay, we're going to retrench for a little bit, rebrand, and we're going to try something different. Well, authoritarians do that. Putin and the Russian strategy is famous for, if you stick the bayonet in and it's mush, you keep going. If you hit something solid, you pull it out and you try a different spot. So that's certainly a possibility. The third one is doubling down. And actually, with this voter roll heist, which they've pulled, it seems to me that the doubling down is the most likely scenario here. But doubling down also means that you create distraction, especially when you screw up in the way they've been screwing up with ICE. You create a distraction that gets the thing out of the headlines that you want, whether it be Epstein, whether it now be ICE and a problem of their own making, something like an invasion of Iran, etc., Greenland. I think we have to think about, well, what are they going to do to be able to pivot and keep going while distracting everyone? And I suspect we've got more insanity coming in the days ahead.
I think it's important to know that sometimes he doubles down, but sometimes he tacos. And sometimes his doubling down is actually being a taco. And what his borders are in Minnesota, Tom Homan, who himself has been accused of what, taking $50,000 in a food bag as a payment for future jobs in administration that he was going to be giving away, and the only reason he wasn't charged is because they needed him to get the job. Then he got the job, but then FBI couldn't charge you anymore after that because it was already Trump presidency. And then it was all, now we see this. So Tom Homan doesn't inspire any confidence in anybody, but I think
No.
that he already said that they will be taking, there will be a drawdown provided there's cooperation. But they said there was not cooperation, then they say there is cooperation. It's all whatever lies they want to say. But more
putting Homan
realistically,
in place, there was a lovely social media thing which was like replacing Bavir with Homan is like soiling your pants and deciding to change your shirt. It's not a substantive change.
that's, I think that's a very apt comparison, and I think that just means that this TV show has to go to a new scandal. We need, because that episode did not end well. But if we go on to the next one, then people won't remember what happened because the commercial break and the latest news, and now we're on to breaking news for the next Iran. But I tell you, it looks freaking weird and suddenly less relevant to watch protests in Iran on Fox News, while on CNN, there's Minneapolis and Minnesota. Like, to what extent can we be really concerned about problems of what's happening outside of the country as a country when things are actually, reality is actually happening here in front of us? And this president's constant desire to, like Putin, who can't fix things inside the country, so he goes on external adventures and wars because that's how he can maintain support and popularity also, besides his imperial dreams. But on a practical level, he can't do crap inside Russia, so then just you have to flush out all the everything externally. And I guess I'm just hoping that the same way that you can't build democracy in Russia, you can't build a totalitarian state in America. But that's not for lack of trying.
So not for lack of trying, and of course they are experimental. Trump, it seems to me, the two things that he is good at is personal branding, sticking his name on something and artificially inflating the value of that thing, and then cashing in. He doesn't always achieve that, but cashing in before people twig and the price crashes. It's a very, very simple trick, which he's played over and over again. The other thing he does seem capable of is the spaghetti against the wall kind of marketing technique. And of course, his rallies seem to be, in my mind, a giant political marketing campaign, which is you try something, and you're just in real time testing what the audience reaction. Have you gone too far? Have you not gone far enough? I think both of those skill sets seem to be getting less responsive as a feedback loop. As one, he seems to enter cognitive decline, which is seems to be extremely rapid in its progression. The other one, of course, is the stress, the potential lack of sleep, the workload, what he's taking on, the fear of consequences if he can't keep juggling these balls. That would degrade anyone's ability to start, think rationally. And of course, when you're surrounded by sycophants, as we know by Putin, you start to lose those faculties that made you in some ways powerful in the first place. So it seems to me we're not just seeing a sort of cognitive decline into very dangerous territory. We are also seeing him failing in being able to read the room as well.
Well, he feels like he's dictating the rules to the room now. It's kind of the rules have changed, and he either has the rooms where everyone agrees with him, so he's getting used to more and more telling them what they're thinking. So that is kind of a different instinct, and that's part of the problem. The other is, part of the hypocrisy that is one of the themes, I guess, for me today, because part of the hypocrisy here on the Republican and right-wing conservative, whatever you want to call those lovely people side, is that, God forbid, Joe Biden did a tenth of what Trump is doing. They're being impeachment by now.
Hundredth of it. Yeah, Obama points this out very effectively. If he were to send National Guard, let alone ICE, in to say,
If he
Texas
said
to
right, if he
coerce
said he
them, you know.
wanted Greenland and called it Iceland, he'd be impeached twice.
Yes. Same day.
Yes, and
They're
it, you
bringing
know,
those articles. Yeah.
and I can't even say that they would be wrong to do that. It would be the right thing to do. It's just that they are not doing it with Trump. And that leads me to wonder, and more people in the United States, are we in a period of transition? Are we actually observing a president having a decline in front of our eyes that is possibly will lead to him passing away in the middle of a press conference or a cabinet meeting? While they're talking, he'll just close his eyes and check out on TV like a TV character should. But then we're looking at JD Vance and all that thing that come with that, and that's going to be, you know, a whole other show.
Vance, Peter Thiel, Eldridge Colby as I won't
Elon
name
Musk.
Elon Musk. I mean, I won't. I mean, he seems to be so autistic; he doesn't really understand what's kind of going on. But Thiel certainly does. And as I think it was you or Jake Bro who pointed out to me what his company was named after, I'm like, oh, you can't even make this stuff up. It seems that these people have got me almost sort of lost for words, but it does seem that he's on a soap opera time frame, because you cannot have someone having dementia over a decade and slowly declining, because you're not going to run to that many series. You have to have the decline in real time within 14 episodes or whatever it is, and that seems that Trump is in his decline and dotage. He's following the time scale of the soap opera narrative unwinding. So expiring, doing the thing that he loves, lying and grifting in front of the cameras, that would be entirely fitting, perhaps.
I was thinking, since we're talking, since he seems like a TV character more and more, there's this concept which ties in with our logo, I guess, for the podcast, about jumping the shark. And I don't know if that's a concept that's familiar in Great Britain, but in the United States, it refers to a TV show that went too far. And we're referring usually to the Happy Days. That's the series that's also takes place in Wisconsin. And in one of the episodes, one of the main characters, Fonz, when they were like lacking ideas, they go to, I think, Hawaii or something, or California, and he is skating on water skis and he jumps over sharks, and people are just like, that's too much, man. This is it. This is not like a bar in Wisconsin anymore. We're like jumping shark. This is different. So I wonder, when is this jump the shark moment going to be with this TV show, with this administration? Maybe it happened already.
It feels this week that certainly, certainly maybe their little toe got slightly nibbled as they were jumping over the shark. It's certainly an indicator. It seems to me an indicator, and I'm going to put an episode out later, that Trump's authoritarianism, and I think the sort of doom and terror people were feeling, is they're almost accepting it as an inevitability, which again is very Russian. It's what Timothy Schneider says, don't obey in advance. But I think a lot of people are like, this is happening. There's nothing we can do to stop it. Oh my God. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a little bit like the rise of Farage here. There are many who are behaving as if it's already happened rather than resisting it vociferously with all their energy and intelligence. I think what this week showed is that the full Trumpian slide is not inevitable, that it can be resisted and should be resisted. And indeed, it's not certain that it will win. In fact, its victory is only certain if we give up on that resistance to it. In fact, its decline into complete lunacy and sort of violent shambles is the most likely outcome, especially when it's put under just a modicum of pressure.
Well, let me ask you this. I'd like to get, I guess, your take on this. What I'm hearing from what I'm reading is that the nationalists in Europe are not happy with Trump, and they're separating themselves from Trump because now he is like attacking them. And so their nationalist side is kicking in. Is that helping somebody like Farage, or those kinds of people?
Well, this is the interesting difference, isn't it? When you see Meloni, she's done this on so many occasions. She's standing next to Trump and he's saying something or doing something, and she's looking at like, what the hell is going on here? You know, her eyes are rolling her head. She's very talented. She can't keep those emotions in. It's like, you know, she shows exactly what is being thought here, whereas Mark Rutte has got a job to do. His job is there to suck up to Trump, you know, every minute of every day, to preserve his job as head of NATO and to preserve the illusion that NATO is still a unitary force and effective. Neither of that is really true in that sense. I mean, there's effectiveness, but it no longer comes from the broad coalition, and certainly doesn't unfortunately include reliance on the US. So I think there are different individual reactions to this, but they know that their brands are going to be damaged if they go too far in aligning with Trump's message. Even Farage is perhaps the closest to Trump out of all of these figures, and those who I think are most aligned with the Kremlin they're hedging. They're not coming out and condemning it. They prefer to sort of retreat and keep quiet or deflect by saying something sort of supposedly normal about something else. You see Orban, and you see Farage, who I think are the most Kremlin aligned of the more right wing elements in Europe, and most likely the ones that have benefited from support to help fill their pockets. They're not coming out and fully distancing. It's just a temporary sort of suspension of full-throated support. There are many reasons why I think they will not turn on Trump, not least because Farage wants to create a Trumpian revolution in the UK, whereas I'm not sure that really is Maloney's agenda. I can't speak about Le Pen and others, but Fico has come out and apparently said or confided that in his recent experiences of Trump firsthand, he's come out and said that he thinks Trump is demented and dangerous, hence the title of this episode. So there are different reactions there. And I think it's useful to see those who criticize Trump least are probably the ones who are also most aligned with the Kremlin and its objectives. Who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought? Listener viewer writes, Trump regime, the Borg resistance is futile. I think it's the Borg comparison is apt, but I think it's more about assimilation and becoming part of that one unit than necessarily the resistance is futile. As the expression goes in a Russian song by Nautilus Pompilius, this music will be eternal if I change the batteries. I'm going
to have to rewatch that Star Trek episode to see how they deprogrammed people who were released from the Borg. I mean, that might have some
right,
relevance here.
Although I start to think more of Independence Day as a more apt kind of a metaphor, perhaps, but who knows? I had a guest cite Dead Zone by King as a recent comparison that maybe, what Alex Preddy, by his death, he changed the future and now it's going to be different. Who knows, right? In comments, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? What books and what works of art and fiction or not this whole thing makes you think of? Because we in America have no clue. We can't compare this to anything except for Nazi Germany. And that's why we have Tarantino there. That doesn't really give us historical reality.
Congratulations, you have your first dictator. Now what? You did this toy hasn't come with a manual. You guys are going to need to write the manual.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Subscribe to Silicon Curtain. Subscribe to Rashkin Report. Rashkin Report Perspectives. If you read English, speak English, follow me on Substack. That'd be great. Thanks very much. Have a good one. Take care.